So I got involved in this issue. I represent the 3rd District of North Carolina, the home of Camp Lejeune and Cherry Point Marine Air Station, and the home of MORSOC. And I got involved in this in 2007. I did not know anyone in Fox Company. I certainly didn't know the people here today at that time. But my concern was how the Army, General Frank Kearney, could not wait to blast Fox Company and could not give Fox Company the opportunity to have any type of background investigation of the situation, what was right, what was wrong. And at that time, I wrote to Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, copy that letter as we finish the news conference if you'd like to see it, and asked him to investigate why General Kearney felt the need to go out and publicly chastise these Marines who were fighting for our country. I thought it was very unfair. And so I've been involved in this since 2007. I asked 2 members of Congress who themselves, Marines, who have fought in Afghanistan. One, Duncan Hunter, called me from the White House, and he's having a meeting with other Republicans with the new president, so he's probably will not be able to be there. Congressman Ruben Gallego is from Arizona, a Marine who's serving in Congress, and a young man that I have the greatest respect for, not because he's here today, but I know he is one of the future leaders of our country. So with that, he is going to make his comments, but he's already explained that he has to leave for another meeting. And then we will go to Colonel Morgan and then to Major Fred Galvin. So Ruben, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your service to our nation.
My pleasure. And I've got to begin by thanking my fellow Congressman Ann Hask for really all of his leadership on the Armed Services Committee. It's been great as a new member to be able to look up and learn from this gentleman. And yes, we are from different parties, but you know, when I see things that have been done wrong to Marines, I do get involved. You know, I am myself a infantry Marine, served in Iraq in 2005 with Lima Company 325. I know how scary and confusing war can be, but there's nothing more scary and confusing when you know, your honor is called into question. That's exactly what happened to Fox Company on March 4th. It was unfortunate. It besmirched their good name and their service on March 4th, and I think it was unwarranted. There should have been some breathing room, some time given for them to have the opportunity to have a proper investigation before they jump anybody jump to conclusions. As somebody that has seen the direct effects of combat, especially in some urban environments, I know things can get really bad really quickly, but at the core, every Marine always tries to serve with honor and dignity, and I'm glad to be a sponsor of this bill to make sure that the conduct of what occurred on March 4th and what was said about the Marines' conduct on March 4th by the officer in charge should not be taken into full knowledge of what we believe Fox Company is as an entity, as a MARSOC entity. So it is my pleasure to be here. It is my pleasure to support you, Mr. Jones, on this, and I hope that we at least bring some comfort to the men of Fox Company who richly deserve it. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you so
much. Good morning. My name is Steve Morgan. Some of you know me. I just want to take a moment here to thank Congressman Jones for your continued support for the MARSOC 7. I know that it takes a lot of courage to continue this fight, especially since there are a lot of people that would just as soon Congressman Jones go away with this issue, and not just from the Marine Corps. So Congressman Gallego just left. I know that Congressman Moulton and Congressman Hunter, all former Marines. I want to thank them for their continued spirit of Semper Fi. It's good to see these Marines coming out to support what's really something that's been wrong. So I just want to make a couple of comments. So I was a junior member of the Court of Inquiry. For those of you that don't know, General Mattis, now the Secretary of Defense, is the officer that convened the Court of Inquiry. Subsequent to our report being issued, Lieutenant General Helen took over command of Marcent, and General Mattis at the time had gone up to take over Joint Forces Command in Norfolk, Virginia. So I just want to tell you that the Court of Inquiry was not whitewashed, as some people have said, and I would not dare give General Mattis a whitewashed product. No one would. Next point I want to talk to you about is one of the things we recommended in the fitness report is that Major Galvin's, one of the things we mentioned in the Court of Inquiry's report was that Major Galvin's fitness report, he was relieved of command out there, that should stand. And over the years, I've had time to study and pause and reflect. I think that was a mistake. And sir, I know you're involved with Fred's fitness report and some other bureaucratic issues that he's fighting, and I've written some letters, but Fred Galvin did not deserve that fitness report. So, been a lot of talk about the Army and Marine Corps rivalry. It was also, when you get down to the brass tacks, it was a special operations MARSOC rivalry. Special Operations Command owns the money. It's Army-centric. That's what part of the problem was, and no one supported MARSOC coming into the Special Operations community. I think you can read about that in Andy DeGrandpre's article in Military Times and in Nick Kaufman's article in Special Operations Forces Report. So you might ask, why now? Why after all these years we're popping in here? Well, one of the reasons is that so much of the report, so much of the documentation has been classified, and it took Fred Galvin and I years, 5 years, to get these documents released through the FOIA process. It cost us both thousands of dollars to get this done, and that's in money for attorney's fees. But the point is, we prevailed, and now those documents are out there, and Fred and I will make those documents available to any of you that would like to see them. But it tells the story, the report of the Court of Inquiry is there, and literally hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of documentation regarding this incident, to include witness testimony. Finally, it's really important to remember that at the end of the day, what this is about, though, is getting justice for these Marines. So, they were subjected to bad officership by the Army, by the Marine Corps, by the Air Force. And they suffered a moral wound. And that's a wound you don't recover from. Trust me. So, hopefully the office of the Commandant and the Commandant himself will be able to see their way through this and do what's right for these Marines. Again, I want to thank you, sir, for the help you're giving. But at the end of the day, this is to help salve these moral wounds that these Marines have suffered. So, thank you, sir.
In 2007, we were unfairly biased in the press, to include USA Today, New York Times, Washington Post. Very unfortunate that this prejudgment came out, and one individual who stood up for us was Congressman Jones. It's been 10 years almost since that happened, and to have other congressmen who fought in combat to now join with Congressman Jones and support us, and declaring, through the comment on the Marine Corps, that these Marines did what was right, did what was ordered on that day, which was a part of our mission. And that's what we seek, is to have our names fully cleared. I do want to speak very briefly about what our Marines did that morning, as the Marine Corps deployed its very first Special Operations Company of the 21st century in 2007. And on the 4th of March, as Congressman Gallego had mentioned, we were attacked in a village in Badi Khat. So our purpose that morning was to engage the elders of the Shinwari tribe. And as we rolled into that village of Badi Khat, at 9 o'clock in the morning, on a clear morning, we had a van that was filled with explosives and fuel detonate in front of our second vehicle. And those of us on that patrol thought that that vehicle was, and all those personnel were killed. That was not the case. As soon as that had happened, another Afghan vehicle was heading directly perpendicular with 4 individuals in that vehicle, and they were shooting at our second vehicle in an attempt to finish personnel in that vehicle by shooting at them with AK-47s. The man who was knocked down in that turret in our vehicle, in the second vehicle, he immediately stood to his feet, got rid of the flames that he was set fire from the car bomb, and aimed in, clutched his machine gun, and fired and killed. With additionally the gentleman, the other Marine who was in the troop compartment of that ambulance vehicle, joined in to engage that vehicle, as they should. There was not any type of confusion. One other Marine engaged that vehicle from the first vehicle in our convoy, and that vehicle that was advancing directly at our second vehicle stopped. And then, as some additional false reports have been reported by senior Army officers that we fled, that was completely false. And I want everyone in America to know that your Marines did not flee. So, we stayed there for 5 minutes to assess what was going on. And once we had that information clearly in order, we reported that up to our colonel at the Joint Special Operations Task Force headquarters. They understood right then and there that we were attacked by insurgents. It was crystal clear. Anyone in that command that did not know that is negligent and should not be in service today. That was reported in the court of inquiry, which Colonel Morgan sat in, as testified by the Marine liaison officer, that was heard both in the Joint Special Operations Task Force headquarters as well as in our company operations center, which an Army major had testified under sworn oath in the court of inquiry. So our Marines did not make up any story. We were engaged by a car bomb, by jihadists who were shooting at us, and as soon as that vehicle stopped, we were also engaged on the north side of the road. And throughout all this, there was no panic or confusion. I heard the calm voice, that was also heard in those two headquarters. It was heard over the radio of our platoon commander, who's a Marine who was shot in the thigh with a heavy machine gun in the Battle of Fallujah, that he calmly controlled the situation, and his Marines did the right thing. After we assessed that, because there was known to be 3 additional suicide bombers in that village, which we were going to meet the tribal leaders, we decided it probably wasn't a good idea to get out of our vehicles. And if we'd been there 1 minute early, there would have been mass casualties with our Marines that morning. As we began to depart that morning, heading back to our base, as we decided to abort that mission, we were getting engaged repeatedly on the north side of the road. And our Marines returned fire at personnel who were firing at us. As was evidenced in the court of inquiry, that our vehicles were impacted by Soviet-made Dragunov sniper rifles, is a finding of fact in the court of inquiry. As we began to move, the enemy did not want us to leave so quickly, so they dragged the vehicle across the road in a perpendicular fashion and blocked us in a mass mob of military-aged men, which were all the personnel that morning, as we saw at 9 a.m. on this flat road. It was all military-aged men, and they started to advance towards us in an effort to block us from leaving that kill zone. And our lead gunner acted smartly and fired above their heads, clearing the mass, and we were able to return to base. It's important to know that the complexity and sophistication of the enemy that we were fighting, as it's now known, as you've seen, within this new administration, we've had Navy SEAL killed, here in this past month, that the enemy has a very complex information operation campaign. That happened to us within 20 minutes from that ambush site to when we returned to base. This was already broadcast. When we entered our base, our Marines and Fox Company came and joined us at the gate and let us know that this has already been released. Later that day, you saw this already out in the USA Today, and you saw as evidence on 5 March, the day afterwards, President Karzai, then President Hamid Karzai of Afghanistan, condemned us in the press. And this went on up to where senior Army officers felt the need to make prejudicial comments while there's a criminal investigation ongoing, as well as make a press conference from Afghanistan condemning the actions which were still under investigation. So, as we see, right here at the Supreme Court, equal justice under the law did not apply to Marines who were fighting then, and that's why we, truly appreciate and thank you, sir, for your 10 years of effort in supporting clearing our names. And what we want is every American who hears this, to join with Congressman Jones and the additional combat veterans who, are supporting this House Resolution 21. Contact your representatives and urge them to vote in favor of clearing our Marines' names. And I'd like to talk during questions about how this has affected our Marines right now, not just their morale, but as 3 years ago when I was involuntary forced retired. That is occurring with several of our Marines, as has occurred in Colonel Morgan and I attended a retirement ceremony this past year for a Marine. Marines who have been promoted only one time. These are enlisted Marines who generally at that time had served about 8 to 10 years, and now they're reaching their service limitations, and their promotions have been slowed. This is not, a fantasy, and I can give you very specifics if you care to know about them. But thank you very much for your time and your concern. Congressman Jones, thank you.
Major, and those of you in the press, I'm going to be very brief, but when you hear this story and you hear the truth, that's what so many times, whether it be war or the 2 Marine pilots, John Brown and Brooks Gruber, who crashed a V-22 Osprey and 19 Marines were killed, and yet they were not given the benefit of the doubt. And it took me 14 years of my life, and I was afraid I was going to die before I could see this thing accomplished. But Robert Work, the Assistant Secretary of Defense, himself has written a 6-page letter to clear the names of John Brown and Brooks Gruber and say they were not at fault for that crash that killed 19 Marines. Here we have a very similar situation. As has been said prior to me, why not give a warfighter the benefit of the doubt when he is fighting for America and the American people? That's why we have put in this House Resolution 21 that we intend to continue to push to get for Fox Company, a document from either the Marine Corps or from the Secretary of Defense that exonerates these men and what they did for America, just like the Court of Inquiry has exonerated these men. That's what this is all about. And now I'm going to turn it over to excuse me, Major Galvin and Colonel Morgan. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to ask, but these are the 2 men that know what we're talking about in much more detail. Again, I have the letter that I wrote to Bob Gates criticizing General Frank Kearney And I also have a copy of House Resolution 21. Please pick it up on the way out. So with that, Colonel Morgan and Major Galvin, I'm going to bring you back up for questions from the press. And please identify yourself if you don't mind, just for us.
Hi, Travis Fritton, Stars and Stripes newspaper. I was hoping maybe you could summarize the Court of Inquiry findings, kind of the bottom line as far as responsibility, what they found.
Okay, so the very bottom line, as it pertains to your question, is that the Marines under Fred Galvin's command acted according to the rules of engagement that were in place at the time, and they acted appropriately. That's the bottom line. There were some other things that we found. The Marine Corps kind of left Major Galvin and his crew out hanging because, in our opinion, they hadn't been properly trained in staff procedures, and in special operations, it's far more complicated in your staffing procedures than it is with the conventional forces. They were left with a very bad logistics tail. That's one of the things we found. There was some criticism of, at the time, Colonel, now General Nicholson, who's in Afghanistan. I'm sure you know his name. That he had no idea that his staff had given Fred's unit permission to operate in his battle space. And he was criticized in there for that. That was one of the things we found. General Kearney, General Nicholson, Colonel Nicholson were both quick to jump the gun on running these guys up the flagpole. We also found that the initial investigation was flawed. That was done by the Chief of Staff of Special Operations Command, and we also looked at that as being something that was probably unduly influenced by the command. And like I said, if you look at the documents, you'll see maybe, I'm thinking, we'd have to check. So, but I'm thinking the number we had was somewhere between 9 and 25. We just couldn't, we couldn't figure that out exactly, but, by all appearances, it was probably around that number. And what you have to remember about the Afghan culture is, they want to bury their people as soon as possible. And Fred was in a pickle. He left, as he should have. And so it was kind of hard to go back and clean up the battlefield and count the bodies. So it's unfortunate. We all know that. But if you've ever been to a place like Afghanistan and been in a hellacious firefight, the brutal truth is that's just the facts of war.
Thank you.
To clarify that, there was a U.S. Army military police patrol that came in approximately 25 minutes after we had been ambushed and we departed the area. U.S. Army trained in military police, they cordoned off that area. They found one body. It was headless and limbless. That is the only deceased Afghan that they found from that military police patrol. They cordoned off the area. They found in a report, there was no body or no photo of a body that was shown as any kind of proof whatsoever in that incident. I have a polygraph which I can provide that I took from the President American Polygraph Association. So, as I mentioned before, we stopped there for 5 minutes. And that was as it can be in a military court. as in my statements that have shown no deception indicated, we saw no civilians killed at all. People were fighting as on a straight road and having turns on it. We stopped there for 5 minutes. I observed from where I was, and then as we slowly moved out of there, I never saw any women or children, nor did anybody report saying there was women and children there, which from the Afghan testimony, which if you review the stories that have been widely documented in Military Times and SOFREP, some of those have, Afghans completely inconsistent, saying that the majority of the civilian casualties were women, children, and elderly, which no one on that patrol saw any evidence of that. Those testimonies from the Afghans were extraordinary and unbelievable. But our Marines had that consistent testimony, and they were not coerced, as Colonel Morgan had heard during the court of inquiry. When we were in contact, those reports were heard both in our operations center and in our higher headquarters, as well as we both sent data messages, myself and another officer on that patrol, immediately from the time that we were ambushed. So all this, the protests, that was part of an enemy information operation campaign, as I referenced, just like the Navy SEALs had experienced this past month, that civilians had been killed. If a bullet went astray and killed somebody, it was not ever intended, and we never saw any dead civilians as we stayed in that ambush zone for 5 minutes. Yes, sir.
This is Shakir from the Voice of America. What my understanding is that the Marine Act, according to the rules which was in place, and you were saying that there was no civilian casualties in Batikot district of Nangarhar province at all.
I was not a witness. I did not see a single civilian casualty whatsoever.
All right. And how about the civilian casualties in general? So as an Afghan journalist, I'm asking this. This is a big issue in Afghanistan at the moment. If we see the recent airstrike in Helmand province, that again created a discussion about the international troops airstrike in the Afghan villages. This is a big concern, like in the past government as well as in the new government. How you could address this issue?
What you're speaking of, I believe, covers multiple instances over several years where, if you look at our case, there were cases prior to ours where there's allegations of civilian casualties, but when we were alleged, and when the entire 120 Marine and Navy corpsmen were kicked out of the country, that accelerated, and it would be hard to find in any city here in America, from a small municipality like I'm from in Kansas, or anywhere, that if you paid 4 years of the average American wage like they did in Afghanistan, so if you're paying nearly $250,000 and showing no evidence, I was surprised that there was only 19 people. But what the table needs to be turned and asked, if people were killed here in this office building, that would be horrible, but people get their facts straight. One thing that was never the same is that day, on the 4th of March, what I can tell you about is the numbers changed from 4 to 6 to 8 to 10 to 12, 16, 19, and these are all numbers that I've heard quoted in different media sources. So what I will say is, I saw no civilians killed, and everybody that was feeding information to the media that day, that still, the reason that I'm here is because after I retired 3 years ago, we continue to still get beat up in the press that was saying different numbers, 19, some 10, and that affects the quality of life of our Marines who are currently serving. They can't get promoted. Guys who are out of the Marine Corps, they can't get jobs because this slander is out there. But I will tell you what happened on the 4th of March, 2007. So we didn't kill any civilians. And that still is out there perpetuated by people that think, who made those original allegations. They're still out there, making statements to writers of books, on lecture circuits, perpetuating a lie, in getting paid for it by saying that we killed civilians. It's just completely false. And that's the most important thing. That I can't talk about every single case that's gone on, but I can say that after ours, that tactic basically was registered by the Taliban that it was very effective in getting an entire 120 special operation personnel unit kicked out, with tying up all kinds of lift, moving us out of that country as quickly as they could. And that's what I can tell you about. But we did not see any civilians killed. There was one person in that patrol that said that later on, and we have not been able to get his email transcripts from the convening authority, which proved that he, not a lawyer, but basically perjured himself in the court of inquiry by saying in that email that sure enough we were shot at on both sides of the road. It was a complex ambush. So every single person on that patrol, despite the very skewed information that came out at the beginning of the court of inquiry, because that information which the members could see was not fully available to read. This one Marine who had been pounced on by the investigating officer, that he thought that people were killed, but that's not what he immediately after that ambush came back and typed an email to another individual in the U.S. Army. It confirmed that every single person on that patrol, to include the Afghan interpreter, that the investigating officer omitted his statement, which we heard in the court of inquiry completely exonerated us, as also did the evidence from the explosives experts that confirmed that our vehicles were shot at. So.
And I'm going to be really, really quick with my jump in here, is that, this goes to one of the problems that we have in this war that we're fighting, is that you can't tell civilians from combatants because everybody's wearing the same thing. But the way we looked at it in the court of inquiry is that anybody that died out there that day, any Afghani that died out there that day, was a combatant, not a civilian. And that combatant was wearing civilian clothes. So anybody that died out there that day, in my opinion, was not your just run-of-the-mill civilian. It was a enemy combatant wearing local dress.
Let me also very quickly, that we've got to come to your question. This is a prime example of why this has so much misinformation has developed from this firefight, is because General Kearney could not wait to criticize the Marines. Instead of saying we need to investigate to find out what happened or what didn't happen, they just could not wait to get in the press and attack Fox Company. And that's why all this misinformation is swelling of this whole story. And I feel very passionate about it, and that's why General Kearney has made the comment, without using my name, that he was not going to get promoted because someone asked for an investigation of this situation. I'm glad I asked for it.
And may I ask just a follow-up question to that? I just asked about the civilian casualties in general. Are you concerned about it? Like the ongoing civilian casualties?
I've never met anyone that's worn an American uniform and deployed to combat that had disregard, for human life of anyone's life, whether it's a fellow, NATO or coalition soldier or an American, or a civilian in whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, the Philippines. That's the training that our command went through was so intense, and these were Marines who were specially selected and then further trained for 11 months. Once we were fully assembled, which is almost twice the amount of preparation time that at that time in 2006 before we deployed. That was twice the amount of preparation time than we had normally received in the prior 4 to 5 years that we've been deploying. And it's all on discriminating shooting. That was a finding of fact in the court of inquiry, that there was, that this was a world-class trained force in direct action, which has a specified task of discriminating shooting. So that is, if there's nothing in their hands, if there's no type of weapon or bomb or a threat, that target, that individual does not get engaged. And like I said, I can comment to you about this event from the 4th of March, that our Marines didn't act wildly. There was reports that even our own chain of command told us the day I was relieved that, asking us questions, will we be drunk? Because that's what the local Afghan elders had told different U.S. government officials, that we were drunk, that we dismounted, and that we went house to house, building to building, just shooting random civilians. And that their comments was that there was no car bomb. So, where you get your information is very important. But as Congressman Jones had mentioned, General Kearney, his investigating officer, had to completely disregard 100% of the statements that his investigating officer had known about, that said no civilians were killed. So we don't.
Andy, let the young lady go, and then you go next, and then we bring it to a close. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Diana. I'm not affiliated with an organization over at Finance. I have a question about General Kearney and General Nicholson in this kind of situation. The Colonel mentioned that they came under criticism in the Court of Inquiry for going to the press and running everybody at the flagpole and worse. And I'm just wondering, do they have to sign, or are they given an opportunity to comment? Did they have to comment? Have they made any comment about the results of the Court of Inquiry?
No. And they've had the opportunity, maybe after you can talk to Andy and Nate over here from SOFRET, but they've both not said anything, But I will tell you, I guess General Kearney said a few things, and basically what he said, this hurt my career. I didn't get promoted to 4th Star because of this. General Nicholson had no comment, but he did talk to, what's her name, Carlotta Call. You probably recognize the name, and there's probably about 2 pages of his comments in her book called the Wrong Ending or the Long War. But long after the Court of Inquiry had cleared these Marines, General Nicholson was, in 2014, the Court of Inquiry was in 2008, he was still propagating the story that these Marines had run through this village, shooting, senior citizens, the crippled, the children, the old ladies, all this. And so that story was still being propagated. So neither one of them has really come out. And, General Kearney called Fred a couple of weeks ago, and Fred challenged him to come here. He's not here. You challenged Nicholson to come here today. He's not here. Gives you some basis of the character. I made reference to the fact, when I talked earlier, that there are people who prefer that the congressman doesn't push on this. Look at Nicholson's family, what his connections in this town are, and look at what the DOD IG, who conducted the investigation on General Kearney and on General Nicholson. Look what the connection is there to General Nicholson. I've talked to Marine Corps lawyers about this and done a little matrix and drawn the little dots. And the connection, the direct connection to Nicholson's family to the IG will give you goosebumps. So I would recommend to everybody here that you look at that, because I see that's what part of the problem is. I'm not going to give you the full details, but Fred and I will talk to you about that. But they have never stood up like men, like soldiers, and done the right thing.
Andy, and then we'll bring it to a close after the Andy.
Yeah, thank you. I'm hoping you can help us better understand sort of specifically what the Marine Corps or the Secretary of Defense can do for you, Fred, and your men, and why, in your view, are they reluctant to do so? Why is the institution reluctant to put its neck out for you?
The Marine Corps is a great organization. And the reason we're asking the Marine Corps leadership or the Secretary of Defense to to completely clear our names, is whether it is ever admitted publicly, but inside the Marine Special Operations Command, we have Marines from Fox Company that were not even on this patrol, that were not even named whatsoever, because they had nothing to do with any event that was investigated at all. I was just recently speaking with a Marine who I've known for over 20 years now, and he has faithfully served his country. He's not been able to get promoted. So they, just like, these are faithfully serving, U.S. Marines who answered their country's call during a time of war and continually serve, and they have families, and the same thing's happening to them that happened to me in 2014 when I was forced to retire. These two individuals, one we saw retire in June of this past year here in Washington, D.C. Unless the Marine Corps is an upper out organization, they're either going to get promoted or they're going to get forced to retire or leave the service. And that, when you see people that may be deploying less, may not be serving in as challenging a capacity get promoted, that affects not just the warfighter, but it affects their family. And that's what we're hoping will be done. The reason that I believe, as you know, you've introduced me to a gentleman that I went to the basic officer course with, and he is the public affairs officer for the Commandant of the Marine Corps. He's told me 3 talking points. Why is it this Commandant's responsibility to change anything? The answer to that is the same thing that, any position that I've served in. It doesn't make a difference if it was your fault or not. If there's something wrong, you're a Marine, you fix it. That's what we're obligated to do as officers, is fix the problem. It doesn't matter who did it or when it started, but this is affecting Marines' lives. There's